Hi friends, pretty long time, more than a week. Maybe I'll compensate today with a very long video, but I hope it won't be boring. And because it's a lot of history is involved and a lot of very interesting things, facts, analysis is going to happen. Of course, about the racial tensions in U.S. So for more than a week now, after the I would say brutal murder of George Floyd, protests have been going on throughout US in major cities. Curfew has been imposed. Protesters are also daily coming outside the White House, and many people accuse Mr. Trump of instigating violence, dividing the American people on the basis of race. So force, extraordinary force, unnecessary force have been used on peaceful protesters. Now, the present protests are not only about the death of George Floyd, but against the police brutalities, against peaceful protesters, against media people. A lot of criticism has been that Trump tweeted his followers, his group called Make America Great Again, MAGA, people to come to the same protest site and within quote, talk to the protesters, but at the same time not forgetting the Second Amendment. Second Amendment in US allows the citizens, Americans, to carry guns openly. Unlike in India, where you need a license to have a gun, there Americans can buy it off the shelf. So he says, don't forget Second Amendment when you go out to meet the protesters. That indirectly says that you must carry guns. So he is instigating violence. One of his posts in tweet has been deleted by Twitter because it promoted violence, instigated violence. Of course, similar things are happening in India also. Who can forget the famous jibe by Mr. Modi about that protesters can be identified on the basis of their dress, or a couple of years back, 3 4 years back, about the Samshahan, this what is it, Kabristan differences and all that. So, but at least in US, even Twitter is an American company. It deleted the tweet of the American president because it promoted violence. It instigated people. So that's going on, and of course, is an election year being in US. Everything is politicized. Also, Trump's visit to the church has been questioned because he's not a regular church goer. But the issue today I'm talking about is racism in US. It's not about politics in US. So racism always existed, not only against blacks, not only against Asians. In America, everywhere Asians means Mongoloid people, Chinese, Koreans, Southeast Asians, Japanese, and all that. People of subcontinent, Arabs, Jews, even against Catholics, because US almost all the presidents and all the ministers, top officials are always coming from a very small group known as WASP, WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Most of them are also from the New England, the northeastern states surrounding New York. Most of the presidents are also from the wealthy churches, Episcopalian or Presbyterian. Even Obama, many people think that he's black. He's not. He's half black only. His father was from Kenya, but he never lived with him. He left to Kenya after his birth. His mother was a white woman and she belonged to a wealthy family. So Barack Obama got everything, the best things in life, education, his lifestyle, and all those things. They went to Ivy Leagues, colleges, and all that. There has always been discrimination against blacks. There's a fear among the whites that it's a job of the politicians like Trump to inflame passions and create such fear psychosis that whites will become a minority in US. In 2010 census, the whites constituted non-Hispanic whites constituted around 60% of the population. Latinos or Hispanics, people of Mexican or the old Spanish speaking people, They are around 17% of the population, and blacks are around 12% of the population, and the remainings are Arab, Jews, and Asians, and so in people from subcontinent, Native Americans, Red Indians, and all that. Um, so the first slaves to US came in 1619. That is 401 years back from West Africa. The most of the blacks right now living in US are the descendants of the people healthy. Most of the they kidnap people from West Africa, which is closest to US on the other side of the Atlantic. The cross Atlantic slave trade was a very prominent trade, mostly done by Europeans. Portuguese, Spanish were experts in doing that. Initially, the slaves, black slaves who came to US, worked in the tobacco and indigo plantations in the south, in Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. These are the major areas. Apart from that, also in Alabama, Kentucky, Nebraska, Texas, Mississippi, Florida, and all other southern states also. But the boom for the slave trade happened in the 18th century after cotton gin was found out. Cotton gin was a machine which can remove the seeds, cotton seeds from the cotton. So after the industrial revolution in Europe, particularly in Britain, there was a huge demand for cotton in England from the Manchester industries. So cotton was imported from US. So most of the tobacco growing areas of the south were converted into cotton plantations, and cotton required more labor. For that, more slaves were taken from West Africa. At one point of time in the south, before the American independence, blacks formed around one third of the population. Their conditions are really pathetic. Their marriages were not legal, but they were allowed to have sex so that they can have more children, and children can be traded. They were traded like cattle. Their condition was worse than that of cattle. They are brutally treated. They were lynched if they tried to escape. There was to prevent any uprisings. Divide and rule policy was followed. There was a hierarchy among the slaves also. The highest being the domestic household slaves, and the lowest being the slaves who work on the field. And most of the overseers who brutalized the slaves were themselves the blacks. So this was going on. There were a few uprisings also, but the north, which was more industrialized, never needed the slaves as such, because they wanted labor, free labor, but not slaves. South was more agricultural. So after the independence, American independence, most of the northern states removed slavery, banned slavery from 1794 to 1904. And in 1808, the American Congress itself banned the import of slaves from Africa. But it didn't ban the trading of slaves within US. So that continued because there was enormous pressure from the South not to ban the complete trading of slaves. So it was going on. But there were a lot of brutalizations and uprisings by the blacks, which was completely suppressed. Brutal suppression took place also. So the press in the north was going completely against all these practices, and a lot of blacks from the south escaped and went to the north, and so the so-called underground railroad. So then came Abraham Lincoln, who was not a practicing Christian, who didn't have any religion. Though he believed in God, he didn't follow any religion. And surprisingly, he was a Republican from the north. That was the birth of the Republican Party. Though at present, the Republicans are mostly supported by the whites in the south and Midwest, including Trump's core constituency is the white farmers of the south and Midwest. But the original Republican movement was started in the north. And Abraham Lincoln, after he became the president, wanted to abolish slavery. In response to that, around 11 southern states announced that they are separating from the Confederation, and then the Civil War started. And after the Civil War ended in 1865, slavery was completely abolished in US. But still, the Southerners found different ways to continue their ill treatment of the blacks. The apartheid, which came much later in South Africa in the early 20th century, was copied from southern US states exactly. because there are separate schools for blacks. There are separate, the blacks cannot come and settle in white towns. Blacks cannot travel in the same bus or even the same train. The separate seats were there for them. And most of the blacks were not given voting rights also, though by law Lincoln gave them voting rights. Most of the southern states found ways to disenfranchise them. The same condition is there in India. Untouchability was abolished in our constitution in 1947. One man, one vote, vote was followed. So political justice has been given, but still social and economic justice has not been given to the Dalits and other poor people of India. The same condition is there for the Dalits. It's exactly the same thing. The condition of Dalits in India and the condition of blacks in US. Such apartheid laws are followed in most of they have to pass one test if they have to, if they can get the right to vote, even though the right to vote was guaranteed in the constitution. It was the period is called as Reconstruction Period, the period after the 1860s and 70s following the Civil War, because many amendments to the U.S. Constitution were made by Lincoln and his followers, particularly Mr. Johnson. He was the vice president to Mr. Lincoln. 13th Amendment abolished slavery. 14th Amendment, equal protection law. 15th Amendment gave them the right to vote. But most of the southern states enacted their own laws to supplement the law of the federal government, under which they will conduct a test. Only those who pass the test can vote, and it is made in such a manner that most of the blacks cannot pass the test. So essentially they were not even given political justice. And even after the abolition of slavery, they don't own any lands. Like the same way Dalits also did not own, most of the Dalits do not own any lands in India. So they have to continue their dependence on the whites. They have to work as domestic servants. It's very low paid, factory workers in the north. The US, unlike Europe, never had a very vibrant labor rights movement also. So they always suffered. Though slavery was abolished, they were never considered equal. They were never given the same place to they cannot even yeah, the housing also was a big problem. They cannot get, even in cities in the north also, such discrimination was there. In the predominant white areas, a black cannot buy a house and cannot settle, and all those things are also there. All sort of discrimination. All those things are still practicing in Indian cities also. Even in Delhi and all the major cities, is very difficult for a Dalit to get. Many Dalit people in India change their surname when they come to big cities, so that the discrimination, various different forms of indirect discrimination are still being practiced. Same thing as was happening in US. Um, it continued. They were not even allowed to join US military. Only in 1941, when the World War started, and after the Pearl Harbor attack, when US joined this thing, there was a huge shortage of soldiers in US. And therefore, Roosevelt, the then American president, allowed the blacks to join the military. But there also they were discriminated. They cannot join or rise above a certain rank, which was removed only in the 1950s. Then once the war ended and the US was talking about giving independence, asking US and France, UK and France to give independence to the colonies in other parts of the world and all, there was kind of a reawakening in US. Of course, it was an important incident happened also in 1953 in Alabama, when one black lady, there still, there was apartheid was there. Blacks cannot sit in front part of the bus, which was completely reserved for the whites. She was sitting in the back side, and the white side, every seat was filled. So one white gentleman could not find a seat, so asked this lady, Rosa Parks, to vacate her seat in the back. She refused, and she was arrested, and that led to nationwide protests, and that was the beginning of the civil rights movements in US. Of course, everybody knows the name of Martin Luther King, the great leader, civil rights movements leader. He was minister. He was a Baptist minister. He was a clergyman, in fact. Later in 60s, before his assassination, he came to India and very famously said that I will not come here as a tourist, but it's a form of pilgrimage for me to visit the great land of Gandhi. Of course, India is a great land of Buddha, and Gandhi now, of course, has become the land of wild men. Uh, So the civil rights movement was a second big thing change in the blacks history after the Reconstruction movement, after the Civil War in the 1860s. Almost one century later, in 1950s, the president was Eisenhower. The U.S. Supreme Court came up with historical judgments which banned all sorts of segregation, whether in buses or in schools or in colleges or in housing and all those things, etc. In military, everything. So Eisenhower also brought into it. Eisenhower, the U.S. president, also first time brought in civil rights laws in 1957. Then another law was also made in 1960s also, which was the first time banned all these tests in the southern states, which only after passing the test blacks can vote. All these were banned in the 1960s. Free Housing Act was passed in 1960s, which allowed them, which banned discrimination in the housing societies for all people based on religion, race, or ethnicity or nationality and all those stuff. Affirmative actions were started to provide equal opportunities to the black children, and also in the working place also all discrimination, anti-discrimination laws were passed. So it was a great era. 1950s and 60s was a great era. But unfortunately what happened was, the father of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968. Of course, before that, in 1963, he led a peaceful march in Washington where he made his famous speech, "I Have a Dream" speech. And Simon, almost just 1 or 2 years before the assassination of Martin Luther King, another prominent black leader, Malcolm X, was also assassinated. So essentially, the civil rights movement fizzled out because of lack of leaders, nationwide leaders, and all that thing. But parallel to that, when the Reconstruction started in the 1860s after Lincoln, because of Lincoln's progressive policies, the blacks, so the white supremacists who were defeated in the Civil War in the South, the Confederate States, they started a secret organization called KKK, Ku Klux Klan. It still exists in various forms in the South, the so-called Bible South and the Midwest. Particularly headquarters is in Texas. Now there are different branches and different things. Some are more violent, some are they essentially is like RSS. Their specialization is only hate speech. They target African Americans. Some attacks on Indian Americans have also taken place, and they also even attack Catholics also, Jews, everybody. They just go on hate speech, and they have a very strong presence in social media also. All of them are very, very strong supporters of Mr. Donald Trump right now there. And KKK is not even banned in US till now. Please remember that. But in 1870s, they went for 1860s and 70s, they went for bloody attacks on the people and all that. So it was suppressed at that time, but it was never banned. Even today, it is not banned, though US specializes in banning all the terrorist organizations which operate outside the US soil in all other countries. But KKK is still not banned. Sometimes they come out, they put white mask over their thing. Only the eyes are visible, and they come out and come for a march and all those things, etc. They have some secret rituals and all those stuff. They have killed many people, but still it is not banned. And right now in US there is a group called Antifa. That movement came from Europe. Was a reaction to the growing neo-Nazism in Germany and other parts of Europe. Antifa stands for anti-fascist movement. It's a word coined in Germany, but it's very strong in US. So they are activists. So they want action, but they are not violent people. So what they do they do ethical hacking. They hack the white supremacist organizations like KKK and Trump supporters and all that. When they post hate speech in the name of freedom of expression, hate speech is when they post it in social media. Antifa people go hack that sites and delete that. So now Mr. Trump last 2 3 or 3 days back has said he is going to notify Antifa as a terrorist organization. Though he himself is fanning the inflaming people, fanning hatred, poison, everything he is doing the same thing like his counterparts in fascists in India are doing. He is doing the same thing, but people who are erasing all hate speech, the Antifa group, he wants to classify them as terrorists. Same thing. If you oppose the fascists in India, they'll call you as urban Naxals or anti-nationals or Desh Drohi and all those things, etc. Same thing Trump also. The way the fascists operate is essentially the same. So, though the civil rights movement gained them legal rights for the blacks in US, still the problem, they don't enjoy the same rights because there's the feelings of discrimination, the feelings of prejudice is very strong. May not be visible in places like New York, Philadelphia, New Jersey, and all that. But when you keep on going south and towards the interior parts of the real America, you can really see that when you travel, you can. There's a lot of famous social psychological studies are also there regarding that. The same kind of situation exists in India also. If you come to Delhi, the northeastern people are called as Chinkis, and South Indians are called as Kala. And always people start with, I'm not a racist, but you see this northeastern people are very dirty. You see their culture, the girls smoke, they drink, and they don't do this and all. This is how the mentality, they never had interacted with anybody from northeastern part of India. And this is how the prejudice develops, what is known as the authoritarian personality. A very famous psychological, social psychological study by one Mr. Adorno is their authoritarian personality, that very clearly explains the reason how this prejudice spreads from one person to another person. It is not by interacting with the group against whom you are prejudiced, but with interacting with the group which is prejudiced, which is your own group, your own parents, your own relatives, your own friends. You talk to them and you develop that prejudice without knowing the real situation. So that is a tragedy. That the same thing happens in US also, because there's hardly any interaction between the blacks and whites. Though the interracial marriages are legal now, there are very little interracial marriages happen actually. It is the same thing like India also. Very little interreligious marriages happen in India. In India, of course, apart from racism, there is a problem of casteism, and all those stuff are there. That is a different issue. As I said, untouchability is still being practiced in various disguised forms and all those things, etc. So, similar to the civil rights movement in India, also there is a very famous Dalit rights, Dalit Panther movement, and all were started, but there was lack of national leadership. So, it again could not succeed to the level, even to the level civil rights movement did. So, right now there are no major leaders for the blacks. So, the present George Floyd movement is coming out. It's a pent up frustrations for many years. George Floyd was definitely not the first black, unarmed black to be killed by a white policeman. He's not definitely not going to be the last also. This is a systemic failure, the problem in the very structure on which the nation has been built. Because the problem with the US is it is always an uneven country, the same like India. Because in India it is always a problem of Varna system, caste system, which distinguish people on the basis of birth. The same birth also, always the US is a country which is based on the ultra conservative Protestant people moved from Europe, from England and Scotland. They went to the first New England states, and slowly the westward migration started, and they killed the Native American. There was a genocide of the Red Indians which occurred there. And it is a country built on such violence, blood and gory, justifying all that in the even religious things were used, Bible and all those things were used to justify such genocide against the native people. So it is no wonder that even today such brutalities continue to happen in US there. That's why I always called US a barbaric country, never been a civilized country there. So it's all gloss when you visit the big cities, the Silicon Valley or the Big Apple stuff. But when you scratch and go to the real America, you will find that it is much more. It is probably the most dangerous place in the world to live. So it is spent up frustration of the black people, and of course it is political, being an election year. And of course economic problems also. The big protests always come when economy is in big bad shape. Now US economy has been destroyed. 40 million Americans have filed for unemployment, this thing in the last 3 months. Though most of the states have reopened, still the economy is in very bad shape. Unemployment, and many people have been pushed into poverty throughout the world. So these people are coming out. So it is, and all these restrictions during the coronavirus, all these are, it's a kind of, this, when you come out, it's a group, mob psychology is there. So you can't identify, particularly when you wear a mask. Now, of course, even in US, you have to wear a mask when you come out. Social distancing is not followed, but they wear masks. But but it helps the police, helps the protesters, because police and other people cannot identify the protesters clearly now. So they can throw, some violent incidents have also taken place. Police vehicles have been burnt and Molotov cocktails have been thrown. Even the church next to White House have been some Molotov cocktails have been thrown, and some fire has taken place and all that. But the most of the violence is in reaction to all the decades and centuries of such prejudice and stereotyping and discrimination and economic hardship faced not only by the blacks but also by other minorities, including Latinos. Mm, so this is very difficult to change that. In India, school system has to change. We have to remove this zehar from the people's minds. So catch them young is the most important thing there. So we have to change the way our educational system is functions there. Which in a latent manner tells you the differences among people, that people are not same, people are not equal. There should be a strong message should be sent. Of course, the law and all are there in US also, but most of the police officials are white, and they consider that most of the blacks are thugs. They do all the crimes and all those things, etc. And it is easy to do third degree stuff with the blacks or with any other minority. The same thing happens in India also, that in spite of all the law, the situation remains the same, because most of the officers, either administrative officers or police officials or politicians, belong to the dominant communities. The problem is exactly same in India and US there. So the hope is only with the next generation, because you can't change these people who make such statements. And in UP, one college, medical college principal or somebody said that Muslims, let them die in COVID-19, we won't treat them, and all those things. You can't change such people there, and such people are also, they have no shame. In India, one elephant was killed 2 3 days back in Kerala, and the fascists in India just changed the name of the district where it was killed. It was killed in Palakkad district, but they are now saying Malappuram district, because Malappuram district has a majority of Muslims. So indirectly they are saying Muslims only killed it, whereas the incident happened in Palakkad district. So this is how the media, the fascism people, and the social media all happen to spread such hatred among unsuspecting common man. So as long as such things continue, it is very difficult to change. And at least in US, the media there is dominated by the whites, but they are coming out in support of the blacks who are really suffering. In India, it is not happening. That is a tragedy, unfortunately, in India, particularly in the last 6 7 years or so. So unless and until the way the media reports changes, you can't change anything, because it is about the war for the minds of the people. That the minds are being polluted, poisoned slowly but steadily by deliberate fake news, like what is happening in that news about the elephant death in Kerala. So I hope US now, of course, most of the US past presidents, including Republican presidents like George Bush, have spoken. Jimmy Carter, the long forgotten president from the 80s, have also spoken. Obama has definitely spoken. Joe Biden, the Democratic presidential candidate, has spoken. Everybody is speaking. But except one man who matters the most, Trump. He refuses to condemn the incident, George Floyd incident, and defiantly holds up the Bible to attract votes from his evangelical South and Midwest, which is still rock solidly stands behind him. But slowly and steadily, he is losing support. Of course, I said I don't want to talk about American politics in this video, because already it is too long. So maybe tomorrow I'll talk about another protest which is going on in Hong Kong, the genesis of that, and all those things tomorrow. Yes, bye.